Welcome everyone, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. And we're really excited to share some great information with you. And I'm super excited to introduce Julie, who's going to kind of go over a little bit about some of the things that we're going to be going over today. Julie, can you tell me a little bit more about Future of Dentistry course?
Sure. First of all, good afternoon, everybody. So when COVID initially hit back in the end of late March, I think, it seems like it's a whirlwind away, even though it's been about only 90 days. Benco created a Future of Dentistry task force because we wanted to be at the forefront of solutions. And we wanted to apply the protocols that came from like the FDA, the ADA, CDC, and other state regulators. But we also wanted to ensure practitioners were excited to get handpieces back in their hand and let patients feel safe. So the task force came together to look at the following initiatives. We looked at PPE. That could be from masks to gloves to gowns, COVID testing, air quality that looks at ambient air as well as aerosol air. Design of the future. We focus on all the protocols and recommendations that come through from all those federal and state agencies. We wanted to look at education options as well as any clinical practice or enhancements that hygienists or practitioners would need to make in this post-COVID world.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. I mean, I would imagine too, once you get that many experts together, you get a lot of good feedback, right?
Get a lot of feedback, and the team did a fantastic job at just vetting through hundreds, and I mean hundreds of companies through all those different initiatives, because we wanted to ensure that we brought the best of the class to the Benco customers and practitioners in general. We wanted to do the research just because the way COVID hit, we were all unprepared. And then we were all inundated with all these different options, and we wanted to be able to create a team that created the recommendations for practitioners. We wanted to get dentistry back, but more importantly, we wanted to get it back safely.
Oh my gosh, I love it. That's why I love my team so much. I'm super excited about today. But that being said, I really want to get this started because we have a lot of, I know we have a lot of great information to give out today. I'm going to tell you this. Below on the bottom, you're going to see Q&A. We really want to answer all your questions because we have all the experts on. So if you will make sure to type in any of your questions at the end of the webinar, we will be trying to answer as many of those questions live as possible. If for any reason we don't get to your question today, don't worry. We are going to get the team to answer all the questions, and then we're going to send out every single one of those Q&As to everyone who's on today. That's a win-win for everyone. So with that being said, this is my favorite part. I really get to introduce the person who actually puts everybody together, who actually makes sure that all these teams are put together correctly and does all the hiring and everything goes behind the scene. And I don't know how we can't do it without them. So I would like to introduce the Managing Director of Benco Dental, Chuck Cohen.
Kay, that's great. Thank you very much for having me. And your introduction to me gets better and better all the time. It just feeds my ego more and more. So I appreciate that. Truly, this is one of my favorite webinars that we do because the future of dentistry is where we should be. Our mission statement at Benco is we drive dentistry forward through our innovative solutions and our caring family culture. And this webinar really brings all of that together. We've got 5 Benco experts who are going to talk to you today about where dentistry is going in a post-COVID-19 world. Paul Jackson, principal researcher and all-around dental guy. Melissa Sproul, who heads our design department and comes from a very strong background of overall healthcare design and how it applies to dentistry. Sue Evans, who has been with Benco for over 3 decades and understands more about equipment than probably anyone else out there and has been researching and studying air quality issues. And then Julie Radzminski, who you heard from before. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to this expert team. You are in for a treat today, and our job is to predict where the puck is going and to help you get there before it gets there. So welcome everybody, and thank you. I think the first speaker will be Melissa, correct?
That's right, Chuck. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So as Chuck mentioned, I'm Melissa Sproul and I manage our design department here at Benco Dental. Before I came on board at Benco, I designed hospitals. So when the COVID crisis hit, it sort of put us in a unique position where a lot of the issues that we were seeing around air quality and infection control and a lot of the interim recommendations of the CDC were very much aligned with what has been happening in the hospital world for decades. I'll also share with all of you that my husband is a dentist. He has an independent dental practice, and I am speaking to you, and I have really been looking at this COVID crisis not only with my designer hat on, but also as a practice owner. So he and I have spent the last several weeks really kind of huddling at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, trying to figure out what's next and what's best. So having that personal connection, I think, really helps our design department position needs that are, spot on with what dentists need to get back to work and get patients back in the chair. So the COVID crisis, really unlike anything that we have seen in the dental design world so far, has changed the needs of the dental office. They've changed the physical needs, they've changed the safety needs of the practitioners and of the patients as well. And design is really a response to needs of the people using a space. So we've really taken this opportunity at Benco to examine what these needs are and be able to position a multitude of solutions for our customers to walk away with. Now, of course, the ADA and the CDC have put out some interim guidance. It's evolving. It's changed a few times since we've been involved through this process, and it doesn't quite answer everything, right? There's still a lot of unknowns. But the challenge is we need solutions now because we have customers who are back to work, who want to get back to work. We have customers with design projects on the horizon. So we're really using this opportunity to do our best thinking and share it with all of you. Of course, we do encourage you to keep up to date with the protocols and recommendations from the ADA and CDC. What we've done from a design standpoint is take that, overlay our knowledge of hospital design and decades of dental design experience. Now, as we walk through some of these solutions, there really is no single one-size-fits-all or end-all be-all solution that will work for all practices. There's really sort of a spectrum of safety and infection control and comfort that is, on the horizon for many practices. So we always like to present choice, to lead with choice. And there's really going to be a combination of solutions that may work best for you. So it's, addressing the physical space, it's how you furnish and outfit the space, it's what equipment you use, and of course, air quality is a huge factor that weighs in as well, whether it's built directly into the design and the HVAC system, or if it's addressed in other ways like extraoral suction and air purification, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But let's start by reviewing what are some of the new needs that have come out of the pandemic. So when you look at functional space needs, so needs that require a designated space in your office, whether that be an existing space that changes, a repurposed space, or something new. We have patient screening that has to take place now. I think the important takeaway is to, put some thought into what is your patient screening protocol going to be. Make sure that you have the required tools where you need them so that that process runs smoothly. We're also seeing additional clean storage needs. We have loads of extra PPE that we haven't had to deal with before. So where do we store these things? And furthermore, where do we put these things on? Where do we take them off? How do we deal with soiled linens? How do we deal with all of this increased extra storage? The other thing that we are recommending in response to COVID is closed sterilization areas that are separate from clean supply. So again, this isn't coming down from the ADA or the CDC. This is really coming from what hospitals have been doing for decades. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But in a hospital environment, it's very important to keep clean and dirty spaces separate. So we'll talk about how that can apply to dentistry. Then when we think about safety and comfort needs, there are some design responses that we need just to, make people feel better and feel more comfortable. There's increased emphasis on hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette. You may have noticed in the ADA's recommendations for practices reopening to have supplies for this sort of hygiene visible throughout your practice. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to place those. Personal distancing is, of course, recommended by the CDC. So we'll talk about how that overlays when you look at your reception space. There's additional needs for privacy as well. I think even when, we know that not all the activities in a dental practice can take place in their own designated space, but sometimes just having a screen or a barrier or something to give you that sense or that perception of privacy could be helpful. And we're also seeing a greater need for materials that are cleanable and durable. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I thought that it would be best to kind of tell the story of our solutions using images. So you'll see some of the sketches here that our design team put together, and we'll start in reception. So I think one of the biggest things that we are seeing as practices reopen is, what do I do with my reception space? Do I take every other chair away? Do I take all of the seats out of my reception space? And what we've been studying over the last several weeks is, how do we make reception spaces, which have really become, over the years, you want them to be inviting, you want them to be reflective of your values, and really set that first impression that really sets the tone for the rest of that patient's experience at your practice. It's so important. So how do we incorporate these new COVID needs like personal distancing and still make the waiting room or the reception space feel the way we want it to feel? So you can see here, we've been doing some studies about what does it start to look like as we incorporate screens and partitions. What does it look like as we space our seating apart? And you can see here that there's ways to do that without making, I always use the example of going to the DMV, right, with all the chairs in a row. We can really incorporate different seating types, different groupings and variety. And as you can see here, they add a lot of visual interest to the space, yet they still comply with the needs to, remain a little bit farther apart. Privacy screens are a big one. We're really recommending screens that are movable. I think we want as much flexibility with a lot of these COVID recommendations as possible because our environment is changing so much. And the placement of what we're calling sanitary stations. So the ADA is saying, you need a box of tissues, you need alcohol-based hand sanitizer and a trash can, and any signs that, instruct patients about new protocols or respiratory etiquette. So one of my favorite designer tips, as simple as it may be, is to utilize trays. So if you take a tray and you put your necessary supplies on there, if you've got a sign that talks about respiratory etiquette or office protocols, put it in a nice frame, group these things together and place them around your reception space, whether it be on an end table or at the reception desk. It's a nice, simple, and clean way to incorporate some of these recommendations. So you can go to the next slide. So again, here's another example of utilizing screens and different groupings and types of seatings to address reception spaces. So by varying the seating, it's going to add some interest. It's also so important during this time to make sure that the seating and the furnishings within your reception space are durable and cleanable. Many of our customers want to go to Wayfair or Office Max or TJ Maxx and find a really stylish waiting room seat, but it doesn't mean that it's going to withstand the CDC recommended cleaning protocols. Here at Benco, we're a Herman Miller dealer, but I mean, really any commercial furniture manufacturer that's designated to the healthcare market, they're going to build their furniture with materials that are designed to withstand that heavy use, the heavy, butts and seats in and out all day long. So they're going to be much more durable. They're going to look better longer. And all of the materials are going to be able to withstand the heavy cleaning protocols. And again, we want to keep screens and partitions movable and flexible. You can go to the next slide, please. So we have customers, design customers all across the country, and we know I'm located in Pennsylvania, but not a lot of places don't have, they have the luxury of a large reception space. I was on a call with our sales region in Manhattan, and they said, what do our customers do? Here in the city, you don't even have the luxury of being able to wait in your car. So I think just simple screens in between the seats, as you can see in the rendering on the left-hand side. Screens are, of course, appropriate at reception desks as well. I think you want to weigh the pros and cons. What's interesting is there's very little research about the effectiveness of screens in terms of containing air. Hopefully, we're looking at the pandemic as a reason to really spark some additional research around this area. But we know that a screen is certainly something that can cue a behavior or make people feel a little bit safer. So that said, our recommendation, if you're looking to incorporate screens in your practice, whether in reception or at the front desk, make them movable, make them flexible. I don't think there's really any reason to make a large investment, you know, spend $10,000 or $15,000 in closing your reception space in glass or plexiglass when our needs could very well evolve 6 months or a year from now. The other thing that's interesting about screens is there's an acoustic change that will happen from one side of the desk to the other. So make sure that, you know, you're being mindful if you are deciding to enclose your reception desk. You know, one of the sort of unforeseen effects of that is not being able to hear as well on the other side. So our recommendation is keep it movable and keep it flexible. Next slide, please. So let's talk about operatories. What we are really seeing and promoting at Benco is the move back to closed operatories. We think that it's a great solution for a number of reasons. I think there's sort of a myth that open operatories save space. And coming from a department, we plan about 1,000 offices a year. And I can tell you that open bay operatories, they don't really save a lot of space, if any at all. You know, those center islands are really big. There's clearances required all around, especially when you're sharing a sink in between. So don't let space savings deter you from looking at a closed operatory versus an open operatory. We also have a lot of customers who say, oh, I like the openness and the lightness that you can achieve with open bays. There's actually ways to do that with closed operatories. You can incorporate what we call clear story windows. So if you were to take the top, 18 inches or 2 feet of your operatory walls, you can insert things like glass, plexiglass panels, decorative resins, things that can kind of create a feeling of lightness and share some lightness between the rooms, but still allowing for privacy. You'll see in the rendering on the left-hand side, we're showing a dual entry operatory, which is very common. And there's ways to add doors to make these private that are minimally invasive. We're showing a pocket door on the left-hand side, and on the right, which is the assistant's entrance, is actually a barn door that opens on the corridor side. So these are great ways to add doors to your practices without necessarily taking up a lot of swing space with doors that open and close in traditional ways. Another one of the really exciting things that we're studying here at Benco is the concept of distributed waiting or decentralized waiting. So if we made the reception spaces of a dental practice much smaller, but we incorporated a small vestibule at the outside of each operatory, you can see it on the right-hand side of that rendering that has a couple of seats. This is an interesting concept, and it's something that hospitals across the country are doing, especially when it comes to emergency rooms. Let's get patients out of the waiting room and triaged right away to sort of a sub-waiting space. In dentistry, this space could be used for a variety of things. You'll see a screen that's mounted there on the back of the 12 o'clock wall that can be used for patient education or patient engagement. They can pick their favorite Netflix channel while they wait. This can also be used for patient intake. It can be used for billing, and it's a great space to be used for consultation. So a little bit of a different concept, but that's one of the favorite things that we like to do here in our design department is, approach these new problems in creative ways. And this is one that we haven't seen before in dentistry that we're happy to explore. You can go to the next slide, please. So I also get asked very often, what do I do if I have existing open bays? How can I close these off or create a sense of privacy? So there are a lot of awesome screen vendors that have come to the market. Now, again, a screen doesn't necessarily mean that contaminated air can't travel or circulate around it. There's really no foolproof way of closing off operatories. However, if it creates that little bit of a feeling of security, of safety, in my opinion, it's a win. So there's different mounting styles. There are screens that can hang from the ceiling. There are screens that can actually have a magnet at the top that can attach right to your ceiling grid, very easy to install. or hanging as you see here in the picture. These screens also have an acoustic property, which I think is very valuable. Open bays can be a little bit loud, just, you know, kind of by design. Acoustic materials, they might seem soft when you look at them, right? Because when they're soft, they can absorb sound. But believe it or not, the image that you see here, it's made of PET, which is basically like a fiber that's made of plastic. So even though this is a soft looking, sound absorbing material, you can spray it with an EPA registered disinfectant and it will hold up beautifully. This particular style has perforations. They're available both with and without, but we think that screens are a great solution for open bays. You can go to the next slide, please. The other thing that you can do if you're looking to close up your open bays is simple hospital grade privacy curtains. It's definitely not ideal, but if done well, it can be just fine from an aesthetic standpoint. I think the important thing to do if you are looking at curtains to separate your bays, find a local hospital linen company, because they're going to do a couple of things. The first is they're very good at how they are able to design and manipulate the overhead track. It can make tight curves. It can fit around very specific spaces if done well. A hospital linen company is also going to look at healthcare grade curtains. They're easy to clean, and some of them even have antimicrobial coatings over top for an extra layer of protection. The other thing to be mindful of as you separate open bays is the sprinklers that are overhead. There's a lot of things overhead in a dental office. We've got ceiling lights, we've got, you know, x-rays mounted on the wall, a lot of things that can kind of clash and interfere, but I think most folks don't register that there's sprinklers up there as well, and those sprinklers have a very important life safety component and a code component to the design of your practice. So the code states that you need to have 18 inches of clearance between your ceiling and any obstruction to allow the sprinklers to spray with the appropriate span to protect in the event of a fire. So a hospital grade privacy curtain will actually have 18 inches of mesh up at the top for just that reason. You can go to the next slide, please. So another thing that we're studying at Benco, as I alluded to in the beginning of the presentation, was separation of sterilization and clean supply. Again, this is not a mandate by the CDC or the ADA, but as we're doing our best thinking in response to the pandemic, we know that hospitals have been separating clean and dirty spaces for quite some time. So what we're showing here is kind of a prototype of what happens if we keep sterilization separate. And just sort of food for thought, in a hospital environment, sterilization or dirty spaces are designed with negative air pressure, and clean supply spaces are designed with positive air pressure. Negative air, it keeps the contaminants in that room from going out and contaminating other areas of the practice. It's ideally exhausted directly outdoors. Where positive air pressure is going to have a constant intake of fresh air to keep the clean supplies clean. So when you think about the dental sterilization process, it's really been the same for quite a long time. And the COVID crisis is a great opportunity to look at how can we make this better. So a couple of the things that we're looking at Benco is, what if a sterilization space, in addition to being a closed designated room, had a drop-off window for cassettes? So you can be a practitioner. We know that the sterilization is kind of like the kitchen island of a dental practice. It's very busy. There's a lot of in and out. But imagine how we can, affect infection control if we can drop off dirty materials without actually having to enter the dirty space. There's a great benefit there. You'll also see in this plan that there's sort of a pass-through window up at the top between sterilization and clean. So the thought is, after you have your cassettes wrapped and everything is clean, you place them in that window and they can then be accessed from the clean side. What that also does is it gives the ability, as you're working and resupplying your rooms, a practitioner can go in, grab clean supplies from a clean room, bring them out to where they go without having to enter a dirty space. You'll also notice in clean supply, and even in sterilization, a lot of storage. I think storage is often overlooked in a practice, but as we are looking at increased PPE especially, it's so important, and I'll give you a couple of tips on incorporating it. One thing that is a really easy way to close off, say you have an existing sterilization center that's maybe galley style, we love the use of barn doors. We find that they're very versatile and they're space saving. So it gives you the ability to close up a room without having a door swing take up valuable square footage. You can go to the next slide, please. So just a couple of thoughts around clean supply storage, especially as we deal with all of this increased PPE. You should not be storing your boxes of PPE down on the floor. Everything should be elevated. So even some simple designated wire shelving is a really inexpensive way to give you some extra square footage. Of course, we love tip out bins in our design department. We think that it's just a powerhouse way to add organized, concise storage that doesn't take up a lot of square footage. Next slide, please. So when you look at the design of a hospital space, they have what are called designated donning rooms. So this might be something for you to consider if you're renovating a practice or if you're building new. Of course, existing practices don't typically have the luxury of adding a new space with a complete new function, but as we look at the future of practice design, I think it's important to consider designated donning and PPE storage spaces. So as you look at this rendering, this is what it would look like in a hospital space. It could be very appropriate for dental as well. The important things are we want to keep this separate from sterilization because sterilization is considered a dirty space, and we want to make sure that there's adequate storage for that PPE. Next slide, please. So it also brings us to what do we do with all of the soiled materials that we are taking off? Hospitals have designated doffing spaces where, let's say somebody comes out of surgery, before they leave the surgery suite, they have a room where they can take off all of their contaminated PPE, put it in a bin, and then they're able to leave the room without taking any of that dirty stuff with them. So I think as far as dental, now I know that the CDC recommendations are saying, you know, to doff like your disposable gown within the room, but there are still a couple of things to think through. So for example, if you're utilizing a laundry service to deal with lab coats, we have to think through where you're going to store dirty scrubs or dirty lab coats. Hospitals have what they call soiled holding spaces. So it's basically a room where you can keep all of the soiled material. It's, you know, it's closed off, it's designated, it's not going to contaminate anything. And then you have safekeeping for the soiled material until they can be removed by your linen company, or even by your own staff if you're doing your own laundry. It's just kind of a nice place to store in the interim. Next slide, please. So on-site laundry is something also to consider in dental practices moving forward. A lot of practices have them. We do have customers who recommend them, but I think asking customers who are undergoing renovations or new builds, it's an important question to ask, right? More important than ever before. How are you addressing your scrubs and your PPE? So for practices who are doing laundry on site, these are just a couple of different ways that we have approached it. In the past, we would often incorporate it into sort of a team space. What's not shown in this rendering is it's nice to kind of have a wall of lockers in between to separate these two functions. And of course, stackable units are a really nice, safe, space-saving way to deal with on-site laundry as well. Next slide, please. So while we're on the topic of team spaces, I think the pandemic has really caused us to think about, you know, as people are returning to work, they're returning to a very different environment, right? We have, you know, there's a lot of unknowns. There are staff members who just might have some additional anxiety or concern about their safety, or even if they feel comfortable, your patients might not. And that definitely carries over to your staff. And you want to make sure that you are nurturing your staff in a way that allows them to really bring their best selves to work every day. And I think a really simple way to accomplish this through design is to give a little bit of love to your team space or your break room, as they're traditionally called. Often these are afterthoughts, but I think it's so important that every team member have what I like to call a place to hang your hat. By simply having a designated locker or a cubby or a hook, it really just builds a sense of comfort and a sense of camaraderie, and it makes your staff feel important that they have that little space. Also think of your team space as an area of respite. It's really important for our mental health and for our well-being to have that space where you can turn it off for a little bit, have some lunch, have a cup of coffee. So this is a great time to really upgrade your team space in that regard. Can go to the next slide, please. So I'll leave you with just a couple of additional resources. So as I mentioned, we're constantly asking why and how to, bring better solutions for our customers as our post-COVID-19 world evolves. So just some additional resources should you be interested. On our website, underneath the COVID-19 header, which is right up at the top, we did, as part of our Back to Business webinar, a whole hour on practice design for post-COVID-19. So please check that out, and it's where I talk a little bit deeper about each of these spaces and the functional and psychological needs that have stemmed from the pandemic and how they affect design. We are also working through a white paper strategy. So there's one that we have released, which we'll talk about a bit later in the presentation, but we have a series of white papers focused specifically on dental design that are in editing as we speak. So keep an eye out for those. It was really exciting to do our best thinking there and really put it out for our customers to use. And you also may be familiar with our Build Your Future workshops. So these traditionally were a 2-day CE event, very immersive in our center point locations in different parts of the country, where we talked all about everything you need to know to design or renovate a practice. Well, we're in the process of moving this online, and we're really excited about it. It's going to be kind of a masterclass style format, so please keep an eye out for that, and we hope to see you there. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Paul Jackson, our principal researcher. He is going to share some information with you on the latest CDC and ADA guidance before we get into air quality. Paul?
Thank you, Melissa. So both as Melissa and Julie said, we take a lot of guidance from the CDC and the ADA, as well as other research that we do and other sources. But with that said, I did want to cover a couple of things and made some recommendations to you about both the ADA site and the CDC. Specifically, the ADA site has, if you haven't already downloaded it, a toolkit. It's free, and it really is a step-by-step guide, to both starting your practice up as well as ideas for keeping your patients and yourself and your staff safe. But the CDC one is a lot where it's a resource that the ADA uses, and even they state that they both, reference each other. And what I would say that they both say, and I think it's really helpful, they're science-based recommendations, not regulations, and I think that really, allows for, as Melissa said, each office is different. And I think, how are you going to build this safe environment? And there's not one cookie cutter, this is just the way your dental practice should look, and every dental practice should look that way. They give you guidance on how to incorporate these safety ideas and safety recommendations into your practice. But I did think that I would cover a couple of things, because it's going to be really helpful to go to those sites on a regular basis, because as Melissa said, we're still learning about this, and there could be some changes. And I think, staying flexible and that going to the sites. And so specifically, the CDC changed their guidelines or updated them on June 17th. And there were specifically 3 things that they covered. One was they did have a recommendation to let your room rest before you cleaned and disinfected it after the patient left, of 15 minutes. They changed it. They took the wait time out. The ADA did say that they recommend that you still keep that. The other is a recommendation on when your patients, if they were in your office and ended up getting infected or becoming sick, they changed that to 2 days So your patient should contact you if within 2 days of being in the practice. And then the last is, and this is where it really relates to the subject that Melissa covered, and I'm sandwiched between Sue Evans and Melissa. So both are going to be talking about, talking about engineering controls. And so, how do you keep that space, safe? And, how do you control? Mostly what they're talking about is air quality. And air quality has, been a subject, really for more than 20 years. And so in dental offices. So I think we can look at, all these changes, but it could be a positive change that, not only are we going to protect ourselves and others from COVID, but I think that will improve our environment. And so specifically, they talk a lot about ventilation systems. And again, I'm not going to go through each paragraph, but I think, looking at your office, working with your HVAC staff or companies that you have that maintain your system, different ideas from, clean to less clean. So, but different filtrations and trying to get as much outdoor air in. Also too, looking at putting HEPA, HEPA filtration and different ideas around that. And then specifically actually, putting smaller HEPA units in the operatory. And they even have a suggestion on, where you should place them so that that draws the air away from the practitioners and, towards the filtering. And so that's, a plan to keep, the air not only, cleaner and, but it moves it away, so that you can be safer. Specifically too, talking about aerosols. We're all really aware of aerosols. And so different ideas that, Sue's going to talk about, how to reduce aerosols at their source. And so rather than, and it even states in the CDC guidelines, rather than just relying on your HVAC system. And then it does talk about UVC. A lot of people are talking about UV, but they're talking about it, up in the filtration in the HVAC or in a separate unit, not UVC, for running a light around the room. So, look at the guidelines for what is recommended, but also what is not recommended, and make sure that, you're looking at, there's a lot of discussion around foggers. And so what goes in the fogger? So what does the EPA state about the solutions that you're using in the fogger? And then it does have, ideas around barriers that Melissa talked a lot about. But specifically, you can use it to separate patients, but you can also use it, for separating the airflows. And so that, if you have a filter unit, it can be more efficient for this space, and then you can design it with the air turnover, for another space. So you can use them not only for barriers, for the patients and infection, but also for air. So with that, I'd like to pass to Sue Evans, and she's going to talk about air quality.
Oh, I'm going to try to get on.
Perfect. You're on, Sue.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Evans, and I, as Chuck had mentioned, been here a long time, and I'm proud to work with a team that has been working behind the scenes to bring you products that are going to provide a safer environment for you, your staff, and your patients. I just wanted to say that thank you for letting us be a confidant in talking to you about these products, because we feel that working with Benco or any good dealer, they're going to ensure that you're getting a product from a reputable manufacturer, and that Benco and the manufacturer will stand behind the product. So just wanted to take a few minutes to review some of the various products that we can help you with and provide this environment that provides the safety. So we have various solutions with central evacuation systems, portable chair side evacuation systems, central air, as well as portable air, and a little new and innovative product that Paul will talk about a little bit later. These products can be implemented immediately, such as the mobile systems, or systems that are longer term that can be installed in the ceiling or self-contained in your HVAC systems. The mobile evacuation systems, could you advance to the next slide, please? Let's talk about first a system that is the centralized system. So there is a system, Netterman, which is a centralized system that literally can mount above your ceiling. What's nice about the Netterman system is that it takes away the concern about space on the floor in the area where the hygienist and doctor have to be working, but there are multiple solutions. The most convenient, it would be above the ceiling, but there are multiple solutions to be able to mount that. They have these three really neat, innovative solution around the arms that you are able to move these 360 to get really as close to the oral cavity as possible. Utilizes HEPA filtration, which is, we've been talking about that there are various levels of HEPA filtration, but what's most important is the medical HEPA filtration that is incorporated. And this system vents outdoors. And what's really cool about it is that, if you have the ability to implement this long-term into your practice, it really is around the same cost as what you would be investing in a mobile system. Next slide, please. So you'll see here that there are examples of extraoral mobile suction systems that we carry here at Benco. They vary based on different levels of filtration. And as mentioned, they provide additional safety measures that include UVC lighting that are effective on killing the bacteria or virus. These, again, are mobile, go right into the operatories, and really can get pretty close to the oral cavity to capture additional bacteria that is airborne. These systems will also vary at decibel levels, but not much over what you would find in a normal conversation in an operatory. Next slide, please. So I'd like to go over what is a little test that we learned about with one of the systems that we carry called the ADS. And this test was done at Temple University. And as you can see, there's pictures here that kind of showed that they used paper filters to try and dye to try to capture aerosol as it lands during an aerosol producing procedure. Next slide, please. So what was interesting, the question that was posed actually by the Dean of Temple University is, what is the volume of the aerosol that is generated from using a handpiece in real life clinical settings? He really wanted to know that. So the Dean volunteered as a patient. So they had 2 fully PPE dentists and operated a handpiece close to his teeth for 5 minutes using regular saliva ejectors and HVE suction. They used red dye, as I had mentioned, and the white filter papers. The results surprised us. The aerosol accumulated on his chest, on the dentist assistant side, where you see the papers. Using regular suction, they had mentioned, is enough, but the ADS system, which captured the additional aerosol, reduced the aerosol to almost nil. So it really just does help us understand that, while HV has been used a long time intraorally, that we feel that we recommend that there are additional layers that can help capture even more. And Temple helped us clarify that as well. So, the Dean just said, we need to reframe the question, our dental practice is safe? And we say, he believes they are safer than ever when you're implementing these recommendations. Next slide, please. So here we're showing a few air purification systems that you can have that are either mobile, or also they have different options of implementing air purification into your ceiling grid. So VitaShield, which is a unit that we have just implemented into our offering is a 24/7 active air purification system. It is a patented device that combines ultraviolet germicidal irrigation chamber and circulating fans with an overhead ceiling light to reduce the germs in the air. So the innovative design helps treat the air. It also allows for ambient lighting and UVC to help kill. It is, it's certainly a space saver because it can be installed in a standard 2x4 drop ceiling. They have different various options that you can get. So one could just be just the filtration, and one can be with UV as well as the ambient lighting. So another cool offering. Can you advance to the next slide? So this is where I'm going to hand it back off to Paul, because this is a really cool innovation product that we learned about recently, and we're in the testing phase, and we've gotten some feedback that seems to be very promising. So Paul?
Thank you, Sue.
Welcome.
So if you think of a PAPR, it's sort of like we're talking about air quality here. So it's between sort of PPE and, your air quality that's in the operatory. And so it's personal airspace. And so really how it works is it's a positive pressure device. And so it's a filtered fan that pushes air into the space around your face, and then it's sealed, but not completely sealed because it's a positive pressure. So if there is any leaks, the leaks just go outside, so that it's you don't have any disease or COVID or any. It's all filtered, and there's a small HEPA filter that's built into the unit. This particular one is made by Gentex. They're a company that has been making PAPRs for a while, and more than 10 years. And so mostly for other industries, industrial, maybe like welding or different places, as well as for Ebola. So you probably have seen some of these PAPRs, where it's like a hood, but this is not a very invasive. It's less invasive. It's light because it weighs about a little less than 3 pounds. It is a little heavier than some other PAPRs because the fan and the filter are built into the headpiece. And so that has an advantage where it's less pieces. It's easier to be, sitting in a dental chair. So we think that it works well. And if you think about it, there are certain places, like Sue showed the test with Temple. And if you have four-handed dentistry, the aerosol is reduced, by 80 or 90%. And so, but how do we help hygiene? And so hygiene, I think, I'm not sure how practical or cost-effective it would be to have, four-handed dentistry for hygiene. And so we do have to look at, like Sue was showing, the extraoral suctions, but as we said, there's not one solution for all. And so this PAPR could be a real answer for hygiene. And so this is, you can see the quote there. We're still evaluating to make sure that it's practical for dental, but this is a very popular unit that's used, as I mentioned, in other non-healthcare industries, but it's also very popular in hospitals. So with that, I pass back. Thank you.
There you go, Sue.
There we go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I just wanted to have one last takeaway. So we do have a brochure that electronically can be sent to you, and we can provide as a takeaway. But it's a brochure that really gives more information and allows you to compare all the different products that I had mentioned and even more. There is also, and we are working, as Melissa said, on really full white paper session around all of the topics with the Future of Dentistry Task Force. So air quality is going to be one of them. So we will be providing that as well very shortly. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sue.
Welcome.
Appreciate it. That is the end of the formal part of the presentation. We do have a couple Q&As. Kay, are you good for us to go through a couple Q&As?
Absolutely, please do.
Excellent. And I'm going to turn my head only because I'm using a second screen, so I don't want to seem rude to everybody.
That's okay. And Julie, if you could just stop sharing your screen. I don't know if you did it or not. I
Happy
appreciate that. Thank you so much.
No problem. So the first question will go to both Paul and Sue, and it's about the PAPR. And the question is, and I think it's a great question, how have we had anybody that has like a claustrophobic feeling and has tested it, and what feedback have you gotten, if any?
Yeah, so it's actually, I think you could say face masks can cause claustrophobia, as well as the other is that if you use a combination of a face mask and a face shield, but it would be really very similar to a face shield. And the one thing that everyone keeps saying that has sampled it is that it is cool. And so sometimes, you know, dentistry is stressful, and you can get, you know, no matter how cold you have the room, it still can, you know, create stress. And this, you know, everybody that uses it says that it is very cool. And then we also have a program where we allow you to try the unit if it's not for you, which, you know, it is definitely different. But if it's not for you, then you can return it. And so that's how we're letting customers give us feedback on the unit as well. Sue, anything else that you want to say?
Hey, so you can turn your camera on. There you go.
No, I think you nailed it, Paul.
Sue, since I have you up, there's a question on, which I think this is going to be an easy one. Do we have these items in stock that we can order?
So we actually are having some products, some of the products in transit already to us. Some of the products will be in inventory, but everything that you have seen on the webinar today will be available within the coming weeks. We are told by the end of July we would have, you know, most of the products that we have shown here today.
Great. And then there's a question on UVC lights, in that they're less effective on some RNA viruses, and it takes a certain amount of time. Paul or Sue, do you have any additional information on the HEPA filters and some of the ambient air solutions that we have on how they use the UVC lights?
Yeah, so I would say, first off, I just mentioned UVC lights because I think as the question came in, you have to be very careful. It's only effective for a certain amount of time at a certain distance on certain viruses. And so the light that Sue was talking about is actually designed, and it's really the chamber above the light. And then there's a certain amount, it's calculated how much airflow goes through so that there's enough, you know, the air slows down enough and the light is bright enough, but you don't even see it. It's just a filtration system. And it is actually mentioned in the CDC document, but it's not a UVC light that somebody's holding or sends into a room or turns on. It's actually built into the overhead light. And again, it's calculated. There are also UVC lights that are manufactured for your HVAC system. And so again, what they do is they look at the flow of your HVAC system to know what amount of UVC light, you know, based on that flow, that the amount of brightness that it's enough that it can actually, you know, kill the viruses and bacteria.
Okay, great. We have one additional question, and then Kay, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you so you can go through. And I know that you all any questions that we don't answer, I know that we will go ahead and you will post this webinar. So if anybody has questions we didn't answer, don't worry. Paul, since you're the PAPR expert, I've got a PAPR question for you. In the PAPR that you showed, is it open on the bottom and by the ear? Because the question is around what prevents any aerosols from entering underneath underneath the mask in the dentist's chest or chin area?
Yes, so good. It's a good question because sometimes when you look at this, Papper, you might even see light and you go, oh my. The fan has sufficient flow because it's a positive pressure device that it doesn't matter how well it seals. I mean, obviously you can't be gross about it, but it seals enough and the airflow is sufficient that any openings, and by the way, I did forget to mention it, it's really a fabulous solution for any practitioners with facial hair because you can't get a seal, with a face mask. And so a lot of doctors, one doctor works in a clinic and he paid for it himself because this is my answer and I'm not going to change, my appearance. And so, but it doesn't need to have a perfect seal. The air, as I mentioned, cooling you, is sufficient that if there is a leak, it's blowing out, not in.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Okay, I'll hand
That's
it
the
over to
great
you.
thing about Pappers, by the way. Sorry.
Okay, you're on mute.
That's always better to turn on your mic, right? I said, all I can say is an amazing job. There's so much great information. And, I'm really glad that you're sharing all that information, Paul, about the headsets because, I've put on an N95 mask. And if you wear it all day, I think the biggest thing I'm getting from my doctors is they're exhausted by the end of the day. So I'm glad that we're doing some research so that we can actually help our practices out. So really, guys, fantastic job. So thank you very much. I would like to share with everyone the upcoming webinars. Again, we've tried our best to do one webinar a week so that we can get you out some really good information. And so you want to go ahead and do the next slide, Melissa? Yeah, Alyssa. Okay, so if you hold your phones up and you scan the CR code, that will actually give you a list of all the upcoming ones. Whoops. Okay, let me just tell you a little bit about the ones that are coming up. On Wednesday, on, let's see, July the 1st from 7 to 8, we're going to have Dr. Moorhead. He's going to be doing the checklist of everything that you need in your practice. So again, that's from 7 to 8 Eastern Time on July 1st. And then on July the 8th from 7 to 8, Dr. Faulkner is going to be going over anesthesia. What anesthesia is working in the practice? Because right now we have to see patients a lot quicker. We're not really allowed to go from room to room. So that's going to be a really great webinar that you're not going to want to miss. And then on Wednesday, July 15th, Dr. Kim is going to be talking about the Soleo laser and how you can actually use the Soleo laser in your practice. Because the one thing we do know about the Soleo laser is that it will speed up the patients. There's less anesthesia time. So that's going to be on July 15th from 1 to 2 Eastern Time. We also are going to be offering some workshops that I'm really excited to tell you about. The one workshop that's going to be coming up on July the 17th and the 24th, it's a 2-day workshop. It's going to be from 12 to 2 Eastern Time. Again, it's for 2 days. You'll have to attend both days. This is going to be covering all of the medical information that you need in order to be able to build medical procedures in your dental office. And then the following month, we're going to have Roy Shelburne on, and that's going to be on August the 21st through the 28th. Again, it's a 2-day workshop, and Roy's going to be going over all the changes that are going on with the coding right now, and also what codes to use to make sure that you get your procedures paid for. And if you're on a lot of the PPOs, how do you negotiate to get your PPO fees increased? That's going to be a fantastic workshop. And then we're going to have Catherine Belt. Catherine Belt is an expert in communication. She's going to be going over communication skills with the practice, how we can better communicate with each other and how we can better communicate with ourselves as a team. That workshop is going to be on September the 11th and the 18th. Again, the same time. It's going to be from 12 to 2 Eastern. So please make sure that you plan to attend these workshops. And if you have any questions about any of the upcoming workshops, you can please send an email at practicecoaching@benco.com. That's practicecoaching@benco.com, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. Or we're also open for suggestions. So if there's some things that you would like to know more about, please let us know. And again, thank you guys. You all did a terrific job. It was a great hour. So thank you very much. Everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.